Man, Miss Minutes was out of pocket in this week's episode. Let's get into it.
Oh, take your time. Don't worry about me.
Hey guys, it's Sean O'Connell, the managing editor at CinemaBlend, and I'm continuing my analysis of Loki Season 2. We are up to Episode 3, and a couple of major questions get answered, including what happened to Ravonna, what is going on with Miss Minutes, and we finally catch up with a very important Kang variant. It goes without saying that this analysis video is going to have tons of spoilers for Loki Season 2, Episode 3. If you want to catch up with what we did for the first two episodes of the season, go right here on our YouTube page, and to make sure that you catch all of our analysis videos as they drop shortly after each new episode arrives, hit subscribe, turn on your notifications, and you will get the best Marvel analysis right here on CinemaBlend's YouTube page. So without further ado, let's dive into all of the weird things that happened in episode 3 of season 2 of the ongoing story of Loki.
Let's focus on that cartoon clock.
As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, Miss Minutes was completely out of pocket in this episode, and as we start to get into the reasons why she was so gonzo, I think it's going to give us more evidence and credence to the Ravonna Renslayer theory that we were discussing in our previous analysis. So we finally catch up with Miss Minutes and Ravonna as they are delivering the TVA guidebook to Victor Timely in the past. And we start to get a little more sense of just how dedicated Miss Minutes is to serving Kang as a master, or specifically, He Who Remains. And as the episode develops, we start to realize that this sentient being, who is Miss Minutes, has motivations and emotions and feelings and really strong feelings for Kang. Kang as a whole, and this variant of Kang that we got to meet, which is Victor Timely.
Is there a sketch of me in that journal of yours?
The episode sets up something which I totally did not expect to see in Loki Season 2 so far, which is a love triangle. A love triangle between Miss Minutes, in her own head at least, Victor Timely, and Ravonna Renslayer. And what we talked about with the Renslayer theory is that there is a romance, we believe, that's motivating Kang as to why he wants to eliminate all the different timelines and only preserve the one where he and Ravonna are together. You saw a lot of flirtatious moments between Ravonna and Victor Timely in this episode, and they cut to some reaction shots of Miss Minutes being completely annoyed at the fact that these two are getting together. She goes so far as to dump Renslayer off of a boat.
Bye.
And then that really bizarro sequence where Miss Minutes wants Victor Timely to essentially put her into a body so that she can be a lover for Victor Timely. It's really strange.
A bit creepy.
But again, sort of feeds into this notion that for eons, essentially, she watched He Who Remains and Ravonna Renslayer be together in the Citadel at the end of time. Eventually, Ravonna's memory had to get wiped, and she got sent to work for the TVA and essentially work with Miss Minutes to maintain all the different timelines and the branches. The reason why I think that this Ravonna's memory gets wiped theory has a lot more credence is at the beginning of the episode when they were giving us some scenes that were important to what's going on in this thing. Sylvie asks once again, what was her Nexus event? What happened to essentially put her on her timeline branch and going away from the sacred timeline? And Ravonna says that she honestly doesn't remember. And I think at the time when we saw that happen in season 1, that signified that it was so insignificant, and Ravonna has so many other things going on that she couldn't even be bothered to remember what Sylvie's Nexus event was. But now I think it's another indication that at some point in time, Ravonna's memory of her time spent with He Who Remains was wiped, and then she was placed at the head of the TVA, now forging this, love triangle with Miss Minutes. That gets to be important in the final minutes of the episode, where now Miss Minutes and Ravonna are stuck in the Citadel with the He Who Remains corpse that remains. And you can tell that Miss Minutes is furious. She's got a jealous rage about her, and it's followed by this vengeful promise of a woman scorned.
It was foolish of him to make an enemy out of someone who knows all his secrets. I know a really big one about you.
So I'm guessing in next week's episode, we're going to get even more confirmation of the Renslayer theory, which is the fact that at one point she was lovers with He Who Remains. And when she rejected his actions, killing all the multiversal threads, he wiped her memory, put her at the head of the TVA, and that's where we are now.
It's complicated.
Okay, so let's talk about Victor Timely. He was teased at the very end of Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania when we saw Loki and Mobius sitting in the audience, and we finally catch up with that point and why he is so important to the story right now. I do want to discuss Jonathan Majors, and I want to be blatantly honest and say that it's tough to talk about the situation. We know that he is due in court in October. There's a lot of uncertainty about where he's going in his personal life and his professional life, and because of that, we don't even really know what Marvel Studios is going to do with Jonathan Majors as the character of Kang. He's supposed to be a significant part of Phase 5 and 6 moving forward. We have Avengers movies that are structured around the Kang Dynasty and Secret Wars, and obviously he's an important part of this Loki season going forward. But because of that uncertainty, I think it builds in a little bit of distrust that we don't really know what we can believe about Victor Timely and Kang as a character and where the storyline might go. These two things are sort of interlocked, but for the purpose of this video, I want to just focus on the analysis of the character because there's some interesting things going on with Victor Timely and his importance to the narrative.
You'll love this. Make yourself comfortable.
I don't really love Jonathan Majors' acting choices as Victor Timely. This faux innocence leads me to believe that I think the whole thing might be an act. And I do find what was really interesting about Kang as a character, and when we got to the end of Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, we saw that there were potentially thousands of Kangs, is that every time you meet a new one, it gives Jonathan Majors, the actor, the ability to play him in completely different ways. And He Who Remains was totally different from Kang the Conqueror that we saw in Ant-Man and the Wasp. And now Victor Timely, another variant of Kang, is completely different from both He Who Remains and Kang the Conqueror. So it frees up Jonathan Majors, the performer, to make different choices. Now, I don't love this choice for this one.
I can make my own choices.
But we're going to see how important he is moving on.
Oh, happy day.
So again, I think Victor Timely is putting on an act. I don't necessarily trust what he's doing, and he's presented in the episode as a con artist and a snake oil salesman.
Luminary is the word you're looking
Luminary,
for, Fred.
of course.
He pulls off a sale of his prototypical loom. I feel like he's kind of lying to each of the different people that he's interacting with, whether it's Ravonna or Loki and Sylvie at different points. And now when we get to the end of this episode, we see something really significant that's happening, which is a Kang variant has been moved over to the TVA. The repercussions of that have to be enormous. We're backed into a corner where they need his temporal aura in order to fix what's going on with the loom. But if you bring a Kang variant into the TVA, that can only be bad.
That's a later problem. We have a very serious now problem.
And it's kind of interesting because with Kang, whether it's He Who Remains or Kang the Conqueror, each of the decisions that Marvel characters have to make with him has been like, are we making the right move or are we making the wrong move, and do we trust him? I don't trust him right now, so I'm really excited to see where we go in episode 4 of season 2.
Appreciate that.
I kind of love Loki because it's telling us so much more about Kang and the TVA and the multiversal timeline. And we learned a significant part about Kang's origin, which now when you think about it, we know essentially where he starts and we know essentially where he ends. And in order to explain how he started, they back to the future to the story of Kang.
What?
Essentially, we get a Gray's Sports Almanac being passed to a younger version of a Kang variant. I liked the fact that when we went to Chicago in 1868 and Ravonna gives the copy of the TVA guidebook essentially to a very young Victor Timely, it's identified as a sacred timeline. But then when Mobius and Loki go back to Chicago of 1893, they identify it as a branched timeline. They do signify that, like, no, now we're on a different timeline. That Victor wasn't supposed to get the book. Now he has it. That's why these developments are going on and we're on a branched timeline. I kind of wonder if that's going to be the norm for MCU stories moving forward, that every time we're not on the sacred timeline, it gives us the chance to branch off into another storyline and maybe see some parallel events, maybe some what if type things.
Conceivably.
But of course, anytime that you introduce hey, I'm going back into the past to maybe affect the future, it creates a bunch of headaches. Like, okay, so we're on a branched timeline, and from that branched timeline, Ravonna and Miss Minutes get kicked into the Citadel at the end of time. But they're not on the sacred timeline. They're on the branched timeline, so now they're at the Citadel at the end of time on a branched timeline. Does that mean that they're in an alternate future? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. But it creates that type of confusion that we don't really know what we're doing. And it's kind of funny. Like when you got to Back to the Future, or even a great movie that's on Amazon Prime right now called Totally Killer, trailer, people just blatantly admit like, hey, time travel stories don't really work. Just go with it, right? So we're going with it. But I think there was a real significance to the fact that on that branched timeline, when Loki stood in front of the Asgard display, we had Thor and we had Odin, but we didn't have Loki. We had Balder the Brave. And Loki thought that that was strange. Why am I not part of this Asgardian display? Well, now we're on a branched timeline. And there are subtle differences because things have happened in the past to lead to changes. I think that that's a significant scene. I don't think that was included randomly. I think the fact that Loki is not next to Thor and Odin is going to be something important for Loki's future as we go forward into the MCU.
This has to be a joke.
I do want to comment that over the course of the Back to the Future subplot for this one, we got antics. I'm not a big fan of antics in the MCU. There's a lot of like, you know, slapdash sort of running around, dodging different people, and Victor Timely doing this whole I'm a con artist running from guys. I could do with all that, you know, just being tossed aside. If not for the really significant things that happened in this episode to sort of push the multiversal story forward, I might have written this episode off. It wasn't quite as strong as the previous two, but there were some really big developments, especially in the final minutes, with Ravonna and Miss Minutes probably setting up what's going to be a big vengeance play for them in episode 4, and then, of course, Victor being in the TVA.
Don't make me regret this.
Major things happening at the end of episode 3, setting up a couple of huge confrontations for episode 4. I want to remind you guys that Loki season 2 is only 6 episodes. So we are at the halfway point of the season right now. And it feels like we've, you know, spun a little bit of circles to keep the plot moving in episode 3. I wanted a little bit more TVA in this episode. We got a couple of, you know, quick glances of how they're still dealing with the Loom, but it was a lot of time spent in Chicago. A showcase for Jonathan Majors, but again, I didn't really love the acting choices that he made, but I'm really curious to see where that character's going to go because of the significance of Kang in the MCU moving forward. So, like I said, keep it here on CinemaBlend's YouTube page. Make sure you hit subscribe and that you're turning on your notifications so that you get alerted the moment a new episode drops. And we will see you back here next week for our analysis of Loki Season 2, Episode 4.